Welcome back to the Explainer. Okay, today we are diving headfirst into a really pivotal, lore-heavy chapter of Tolkien's mythos. We're going to witness the exact moment the seemingly perfect world of the elves started to fracture. Our focus is strictly on the events surrounding Fëanor and the Unchaining of Melkor. And if you follow the lore, you already know this is the massive tipping point where basically everything falls apart. So let's just dive right in. To set the stage, we really need to understand just how pristine yet completely fragile the noontide of Valinor actually was. Tolkien describes this fullness of glory and bliss as long in tale of years, but in memory too brief. Just think about that. This was a time when the elves had hit the absolute peak of their peace. All three kindreds were gathered together, and crucially, the Dark Lord Melkor was safely locked away in chains. Part 1. The Noontide of Valinor. During this incredibly vibrant era, the Noldor were just thriving. They grew rapidly in stature of body and mind, and these long years were filled with incredibly joyful labor. You had a lore master named Rúmil who created the very first fitting signs for recording speech and song. Some were made for graving on metal, others for drawing with a pen. This was absolutely a golden age of pure creation and discovery for them. Which brings us to part 2, Fëanor's Spirit of Fire. So, to really grasp how this perfect piece shatters, we have to zoom in on the house of King Finwë, specifically his eldest son. Now, his birth name was Finwë, but his mother Míriel called him Fëanor, which translates to Spirit of Fire. And honestly, it was entirely fitting. She gave him this name because of the all-consuming, just overwhelming energy he drew directly from her during birth. And this birth? It triggers a devastating butterfly effect. It's really the very first internal crack in this perfect world. Míriel was so consumed in spirit and body by bringing Fëanor into the world that she just yearned for release. She essentially fell asleep, and her spirit deported to the halls of Mandos. This left Finwë entirely deprived of joy. He was literally the only person in all the Blessed Realm to experience such profound sorrow. After that, Finwë poured all of his remaining love right into his son. And Fëanor grew swiftly. He was burning with this secret fire, and he became the most subtle in mind and skilled in hand of all the Noldor. He didn't just tweak Rúmil's letters, he bettered them to create a permanent script. He even discovered how to make gems brighter than anything found on Earth. Crystals that literally captured starlight, blazed with blue and silver fires, and let you see far away with eagle-like clarity. A total game changer. Now, you'd think a guy like that would take a break, right? Nope. Seldom were his hands or his mind ever at rest. He wedded early on to Noldorin. She was the daughter of a great smith, and she was this firm-willed but deeply patient elf who really wanted to understand minds rather than just master them. For a long time, she was the only one who could restrain his hot heart. It's actually a really tragic irony that his later, much darker deeds would deeply grieve her, and it eventually leads to their permanent estrangement. And that leads right into part 3, a house divided. Okay, so desiring more children in the bliss of Aman, Finwë eventually takes a second wife, Indis the Fair. She was a golden-haired Vanya, completely the opposite of Míriel in every way, and she did bring Finwë gladness again. But here's the catch. The shadow of Míriel, along with Fëanor's fierce, brooding resentment, never actually departed from the house. Finwë still favored Fëanor, for sure, but the foundational damage to the family was definitely done. Fëanor absolutely hated this marriage. Despised it. He lived completely apart from his new half-brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin. Instead of accepting his new family, he threw himself into his crafts in fiery isolation. Looking back, historians of the Eldars see this exact bitter breach in the House of Finwë as the main catalyst for the terrible strife that would eventually doom them all. Meanwhile, we hit part 4, Melkor's deceptive return. So while Fëanor is off working and his resentment is just festering, the noontide of Valinor is secretly drawing to a close. Why? Because for 3 full ages, 3 entire ages, Melkor, the fallen god, dwelt in the duress of Mandos. Kept alone and chained, he patiently completed his decreed term of bondage before finally being brought back before the thrones of the Valar. And when he returns, Melkor looks upon the bliss of the elves and their incredible bright gems, and his heart is instantly filled with envy. But he plays a masterful long game here. First, he totally abases himself before Manwë, begging for pardon. And Manwë, who is so completely free from evil he literally cannot comprehend it, grants the pardon. From there, Melkor gives fair-seeming counsel and slowly, chillingly, works his way from a restricted prisoner to a totally free citizen roaming all over Valinor. But what's so fascinating to note here is that not everyone bought the act. Manwë believed him cured, sure, and Nianas supported his prayers, but Mandos remained ominously silent. More importantly, Olmo was completely undeceived. In Tulkas was physically clenching his fists every single time Melkor walked by. Tulkas is slow to wrath, but man, he is also slow to forget. Yet tragically, they all still obeyed Manwë's authority. Which kicks off Part 5, The Web of Malice. So with his freedom secured, Melkor feigned love for the elves, but he really targeted the Noldor specifically. See, the Vanyar lived in the light and were suspicious of him. The Teleri, he just ignored them as weak tools. But the Noldor, they had this insatiable hunger for hidden knowledge, and they absolutely took delight in the secrets Melkor revealed to them. And because of this thirst, they eagerly listened to poisoned words they really never should have heard. Now, Melkor later goes around lying, claiming he secretly taught Fëanor and instructed him in his greatest works. But actually, the texts tell a completely different story. Even though Fëanor was definitely snared in the overarching webs of Melkor's malice, he held absolutely no converse with the Dark Lord. He took no counsel from him, or really from anyone in Aman, for that matter. Fëanor worked entirely alone, driven strictly by the fire in his own heart. In fact, Fëanor hated him so intensely that he was the very first person to officially dub him Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world. Think about the tragic irony of that for a second. While the wisest gods in the world were still being completely tricked by fair-seeming words, Fëanor's fierce, unyielding independence actually allowed him to see the enemy clearly, marking him forever with a name that would echo through history. So as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us staring right over the edge of a cliff, doesn't it? You've got Fëanor's consuming, resentful fire burning hot on one side, and Melkor's hidden, manipulative malice creeping in on the other. When these two massive, unyielding forces finally collide, and they will it be the fire from within or the malice from without that ultimately shatters the noontide of Valinor forever? It's a collision that fundamentally changes the fate of the elves eternally. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring the lore.